In a forgotten roadside diner, a waitress with worn hands and tired eyes silently endures the cruel mockery of a billionaire who thinks his money makes him untouchable. What he doesn't realize is that this seemingly insignificant woman holds the key to a decades-old secret that could destroy everything he's built. When she reaches into her pocket and places a faded photograph on his table, his laughter dies instantly. The color drains from his face. For the first time in his privileged life, Elliot Carrington is left completely speechless. What could this struggling single mother possibly know about him that terrifies the most powerful man in the room? As buried truths surface and family secrets unravel, both June and Elliot must make impossible choices that will change their lives forever. Some wounds can only be healed when we confront the past we've tried desperately to forget. If you enjoyed this emotional story of secrets, redemption, and unexpected connections, make sure to follow our channel for more powerful stories that will touch your heart. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from, and share with someone who appreciates stories that remind us what truly matters in life. The roadside diner just outside Grover's Mill sat nearly empty as rain pounded against its tin roof. Each droplet echoed with a hollow sadness that matched the weary eyes of June Marlowe. At 37, her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion as she wiped down the counter with practiced circular motions. The faded blue uniform she wore bore the telltale signs of a long shift. Small grease stains scattered across the fabric, and a dried sauce mark near her waist that no amount of scrubbing seemed to remove. Lightning cracked outside, illuminating the rain-slicked parking lot where only 3 cars remained. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed with an inconsistency that gave everything a slightly surreal quality. The clock on the wall read 9:47 p.m., just over an hour until closing time. "More coffee, Frank?" June asked the elderly truck driver, who'd been nursing the same cup for nearly 40 minutes. Her voice carried the practiced cheerfulness of someone who'd learned to hide pain beneath service. He nodded without looking up from his newspaper. As she poured, a dull ache radiated across her lower back, a chronic pain that had become her silent companion after years of standing on hard tile floors. She'd never complained, though. Not when she had a daughter with severe asthma waiting at home, not when the rent was already 2 weeks late, and her landlord's patience was wearing thinner than the soles of her work shoes. The bell above the entrance jingled, drawing everyone's attention to the door as it swung open violently against the wind. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped inside, his leather shoes gleaming despite the rain. His phone was pressed against his ear and he was laughing. Not the gentle chuckle of shared amusement, but the boisterous, performative laugh of someone who enjoyed the sound of their own voice. "God, yes," he said into the phone, not bothering to lower his volume. "I was forced to stop in this absolute backwater." He shook water from his tailored sleeve. "The storm came out of nowhere. My driver says we're stuck here for at least an hour until it passes." Frank glanced up from his paper, frowning slightly. The woman in the corner booth pulled her coffee closer, suddenly finding the swirling cream fascinating. The man, tall, impeccably groomed with the confident posture of someone who'd never worried about money, surveyed the diner with barely disguised contempt. His eyes landed on June, and something flickered across his face. A smirk, then a louder laugh. "Hold on, Richard," he said into the phone before lowering it slightly. "Now the experience is complete. A sad story waitress, straight out of a Lifetime movie." The diner fell silent. The only sound was the rhythmic dripping from his wet coat onto the linoleum floor. June felt heat rising to her cheeks, but her expression remained neutral, the practiced mask of someone who'd weathered worse storms than the arrogance of wealthy men passing through. She approached with her order pad, pen poised. "Welcome to Marlene's. Can I get you something?" Her voice was steady, professional. The man, Elliot Carrington, though she didn't know it yet, was the 36-year-old billionaire CEO of Carrington Luxury Properties. His empire stretched from Manhattan penthouses to Miami beachfront condos. His face had graced the cover of Fortune 3 months earlier under the headline "America's Youngest Real Estate Mogul." "Well," he said, ending his call and pocketing the phone, "I suppose I should sample the local cuisine." He made no effort to hide his amusement, as though dining here was an anthropological experiment. Whatever passes for a specialty in this establishment. Frank cleared his throat loudly, a silent rebuke. June just nodded. "Our apple pie won the county fair last summer," she offered. "Made fresh this morning." Elliot's eyebrow arched. Apple pie from a roadside diner. How wonderfully quaint. He slid into a booth, casually flicking imaginary dust from the vinyl seat. And coffee, I suppose, though I imagine it's nothing like the Ethiopian blend I had flown in this morning. As June turned to fetch his order, he called after her. I hope your little notepad accepts black cards. Another laugh, sharp and cutting. I'd hate to leave you unpaid. The diner froze. The comment hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. June stopped. For a moment she didn't move. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached into her apron pocket and withdrew an old folded napkin. The paper had yellowed with age, its edges soft from years of handling. Without a word, she walked back to Elliot's table and carefully unfolded it, smoothing it flat against the laminate surface. In the center, held in place with a small piece of tape that had lost most of its adhesive, was a faded photograph. It showed a woman, her features bearing a striking resemblance to June, with her arm around a small blonde boy in a blue suit. The child couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with a missing front tooth and eyes that sparkled with innocent joy. On the back, visible where the corner had curled slightly, was a name written in fading blue ink. Elliot, 1992. The change in Elliot's expression was immediate and absolute. The smirk vanished. The color drained from his face. His eyes, previously alive with mocking amusement, widened with shock and something deeper, something that looked remarkably like fear. His hand moved toward the photograph, fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the image, not quite touching it. Where did you... His voice cracked. He swallowed hard and tried again. Where did you get this? But June was already turning away, sliding the napkin back into her pocket. For the first time since he'd entered, the most powerful person in the room was rendered completely speechless. Behind her, the diner remained silent, the air heavy with unspoken questions. The rain continued its relentless drumming on the roof, but it no longer sounded like sadness. Now it sounded like the beginning of a story long buried, a truth about to break the surface after years beneath still waters. Elliot Carrington couldn't eat. His hand trembled as he lifted the coffee cup to his lips, the bitter liquid spilling slightly onto the pristine tablecloth that now felt rough against his manicured fingertips. The pie sat untouched before him, its flaky crust and cinnamon-scented filling suddenly unappealing. The image from that photograph had burned itself into his consciousness like a brand on skin, a moment from his past he'd tried desperately to forget. The diner had emptied gradually. Frank, the truck driver, had left with a concerned glance back at June. The woman in the booth had slipped out during the tense silence. Now only Elliot remained, watching June as she methodically wiped down tables, her movements practiced and efficient. The rain continued its assault on the tin roof, creating a percussion that matched the pounding in his chest. He tried to recall that day in 1992. The image was familiar, the inauguration of his grandfather's retirement home. His mother, Claire Carrington, had been the director, her philanthropic endeavors a carefully crafted facade for the family's public image. But the woman standing beside him in the photo, her face was a blank space in his memory, deliberately erased or perhaps buried so deeply that even now, confronted with evidence, he couldn't bring it to the surface. "We're closing in 10, June announced, without looking at him, her voice flat, revealing nothing of what had transpired between them. Elliot nodded, though she couldn't see it. He left a $100 bill under his coffee cup and walked out into the rain without opening his umbrella. The cold droplets felt somehow appropriate against his burning skin. In his Mercedes, the leather interior smelling of wealth and privilege, Elliot sat motionless for several minutes before starting the engine. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Then, with a sudden decisiveness, he reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. A number he'd promised never to use again. 1 ring 2 3. "You promised never to call me again." The voice that answered was rough with age and cigarettes, accusatory but not surprised. Elliot closed his eyes, seeing the photograph behind his eyelids. "The truth is coming back, isn't it? She showed me the photo." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the sound of labored breathing. "Which one?" "The retirement home, 1992, with a woman I don't remember." A sharp intake of breath. "Where are you?" "Grover's Mill, a diner called Marlene's." "Stay away from her, Elliot, you hear me? That family has suffered enough because of us." The line went dead before Elliot could respond, leaving him with more questions than answers, a gnawing unease spreading through his chest like frost on glass. Meanwhile, June Marlowe unlocked the door to her small apartment on the east side of town, where the rent was cheap and the walls thin enough to hear the neighbors' arguments. The place was dark except for the blue glow of a small nightlight in the hallway. She moved quietly, placing her keys on the chipped countertop and slipping off her shoes. "Mom?" A small voice called from the bedroom. June followed the sound to find her daughter, Ella, sitting up in bed, her breathing slightly labored. At 11 years old, Ella had her mother's dark hair and determination, but her eyes, bright blue and piercing, came from somewhere else, someone June never spoke about. "Hey, sweetie, how's your breathing tonight?" June sat on the edge of the bed, placing a gentle hand on Ella's forehead. No fever, at least. "Not great." Ella reached for the inhaler on her nightstand, taking a puff that made her wince. "This one's almost empty." June's heart sank. She'd been counting on her next paycheck to refill Ella's prescription, but the hospital had suspended their assistance program due to funding cuts. 3 more days until payday, and the empty inhaler might as well have been a ticking bomb. Once Ella had fallen back asleep, June went to her closet and retrieved a battered shoebox from the highest shelf. Inside, wrapped in a faded silk scarf, was a plastic folder filled with yellowed documents. She spread them across her small kitchen table, each piece a fragment of a story she'd inherited but never fully understood. Letters signed by her mother. A domestic work receipt with Claire Carrington printed at the top in elegant typeface. A non-disclosure agreement with a signature that had been practiced until it was perfect. And buried beneath them all, a small newspaper clipping about the opening of Sunset Meadows Retirement Home, with a blurry photograph that matched the one she'd shown Elliot, though this version included Claire Carrington standing proudly beside her mother and young Elliot. June had known he would recognize her, or at least recognize the photograph. Her mother had predicted as much before she died. "If your paths ever cross, he'll know," she'd said. "And when he does, you'll have a choice to make." What June hadn't told her mother was that her plan wasn't about revenge. It was about justice and survival. With Ella's condition worsening and their insurance denied, she needed the truth to have value, monetary value. The following morning, as June tied her apron for the early shift, she noticed a black sedan parked across the street from the diner. It hadn't been there when she arrived, and the windows were tinted too darkly to see inside. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. By mid-morning, the men entered, 2 of them, dressed in identical dark suits that screamed, "Private security." The first was tall with a military bearing, the second shorter but with eyes that missed nothing. They took a booth near the door, positioned to watch both June and the entrance. "Coffee, please," the taller one requested when she approached. The shorter man said nothing, but his gaze never left her face. She felt exposed, as though he could see through her skin to the secrets underneath. As she turned to leave, the shorter man made a subtle gesture, 2 taps on the pocket of his jacket, before sliding a manila envelope across the table. In the corner, written in black marker, were the initials EC. June didn't take it. Not yet. But she felt its presence like a physical weight as she moved through the rest of her shift, knowing that whatever was inside would change everything. The manila envelope sat on June's kitchen table, untouched, like a landmine waiting to detonate. The overhead light flickered intermittently, another bill she'd paid late, casting shifting shadows across the worn surface. For 3 hours, June had been sitting there, staring at Elliot Carrington's initials scrawled in the corner. Ella had gone to bed an hour ago, her breathing labored even in sleep, the wheezing a constant reminder of what was at stake. Outside, rain had started again, pattering against the windows of their second-floor apartment. A police siren wailed in the distance, then faded. June's coffee had gone cold, a thin film forming on its surface. With trembling fingers, she finally reached for the envelope, sliding her thumbnail under the seal. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery, expensive with a watermark visible when she held it up to the light. The handwriting was precise, each letter formed with deliberate care. "I remember your mother. Claire hid more than you can imagine. We need to talk. Only I can explain what happened in the summer of 1992. Elliot." June read it 3 times, searching for threats, for manipulation, finding neither. At the bottom of the envelope was something else, a small, rusty key attached to a faded tag that read, Box 314, Wilmington Bank. The sight of it made her breath catch. This was the last thing she had expected from him. Not a bribe, not a threat, but a door to the past she had only glimpsed through her mother's fragmented stories. She turned the key over in her palm. It was cold against her skin, the metal worn smooth around the edges. What was inside that box? And why would Elliot Carrington, a man who had laughed at her just yesterday, give her access to it? Was it a trap, or a genuine gesture of what? Reconciliation? Guilt? Sleep eluded her that night. She lay awake, listening to Ella's labored breathing from the other room, the sound piercing her heart with each rasp. By morning, dark circles had formed beneath her eyes, but her mind was clear. She would go to the bank. Mrs. Peterson from next door agreed to watch Ella. "She can rest on my couch," the elderly woman had said, her eyes soft with concern. "You just do what you need to, honey." June borrowed Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick, the upholstery smelling of peppermint and mothballs. The drive to Wilmington took 45 minutes, each mile increasing the knot of anxiety in her stomach. What if this was all an elaborate joke? What if she got there and there was no box 314? What if there was nothing inside but air? The Wilmington Bank stood in the center of town, its limestone facade imposing against the cloudy sky. Inside, the marble floor gleamed under recessed lighting, making June acutely aware of her worn sneakers and the coffee stain on her jacket sleeve. A security guard watched her with mild interest as she approached the reception desk. "I need to access a safety deposit box," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. 20 minutes and several forms later, a bank employee led her to a small, windowless room with a table and 2 chairs. "I'll bring the box," he said. "Take all the time you need." Alone, June studied her reflection in the polished surface of the table. The woman who stared back looked tired, afraid, but there was something else in her eyes, a determination that had been absent for years. Whatever was in that box, she would face it. The door opened, and the employee set a rectangular metal container on the table. "Just press the call button when you're finished," he said, then left, closing the door with a soft click. June inserted the key with hands that refused to be still. The lock turned with surprising ease. Inside the box was a small silver case, tarnished with age, a stack of papers tied with faded blue ribbon, a cassette tape, and a child's bracelet with the name Elliot engraved in tiny letters on a silver plate. The papers came first. Most were financial records, payments from Claire Carrington to June's mother spanning several years, but beneath them was an envelope addressed simply, "To my daughter." June recognized her mother's handwriting instantly. "If you're reading this, it means the promise has been broken. Elliot doesn't know the truth. You have the right to know." The letter continued, detailing how June's mother had been not just a housekeeper, but a confidant to Claire Carrington, witnessing a secret that could destroy the foundation of the Carrington family fortune. The cassette tape was dated July 24, 1992, 3 days after the photograph in June's apron pocket had been taken. June stared at the tape, dust coating its plastic case. She had no way to play it here, no way to know what voices from the past had been preserved on its magnetic strip. She gathered everything into her purse, her mind racing with possibilities. As she drove back to Grover's Mill, the weight of the decision before her pressed down like a physical force. She could confront Elliot with what she'd found, expose whatever truth had been buried, or she could listen to the tape first, understand the full story before taking action. The choice wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about her daughter's future. What June didn't know was that her mother had once been nanny and confidant to Claire Carrington, privy to a grave secret involving the foundation of the Carrington family's wealth. A secret that, if revealed, could topple an empire built on lies. The tape might contain the evidence, the undeniable truth that would force Elliot to acknowledge what his family had done. But would exposing it all publicly help Ella? Or would it simply create another victim in a story that had already claimed too many? By the time she pulled into her apartment complex, the sun was setting, painting the dingy buildings in deceptively warm golden light. Mrs. Peterson met her at the door, her lined face creased with worry. "Ella's fever came back," she said softly. "She's been asking for you." June found her daughter curled on Mrs. Peterson's floral couch, small and vulnerable beneath a crocheted blanket. Her dark hair was damp with sweat, her breathing shallow. "Mom," she whispered, blue eyes, so like those in the photograph, finding June's face. "Did you fix everything?" June knelt beside her, smoothing back the damp hair from her forehead. "I'm working on it, baby, I promise." That night, after carrying Ella back to their apartment and getting her settled with a fresh dose of medication, June sat once more at the kitchen table. The silver case gleamed under the unsteady light. She opened it slowly, revealing yellowed newspaper clippings, a faded photograph of her mother standing beside a younger Claire Carrington, both smiling, and at the bottom, a small note card with a phone number. June stared at the number for a long time, her finger hovering over her cell phone. One call could change everything, expose the truth, demand justice, perhaps secure Ella's future, but it could also open wounds that had been carefully sealed for decades. The decision she made now wouldn't just affect her and Elliot, it would ripple through Ella's life in ways June couldn't predict. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone. The weight of the past and future balanced precariously in her hand. June's fingers trembled as she carefully removed the cassette from its dusty case. The plastic was yellowed with age. The small white label faded but still legible. July 24th, 1992. 3 days after the photo was taken. 3 days that must have changed everything. Finding a cassette player had been harder than she'd expected. After calling several thrift stores, she'd finally located one at Mrs. Abernathy's garage sale 3 blocks over. The elderly woman had sold it for $5, along with a tangle of Christmas lights June didn't need, but bought anyway out of gratitude. "Haven't seen one of these in years," Mrs. Abernathy had said, wiping dust from the device with her sleeve. "Still works though, my late husband was religious about maintaining his gadgets." Now, sitting at her kitchen table with Ella, finally asleep in the next room, June placed the cassette into the player. The plastic mechanism clicked shut with a finality that made her heart race. A deep breath. Then she pressed play. Static filled the room, followed by a rustling sound, as though someone was adjusting the microphone. Then, her mother's voice, younger, less weary than June remembered but unmistakable, broke through the white noise. "I don't know who will hear this. Maybe no one. But I need to record what happened. In case..." A pause, a shaky breath. "They threatened to fire me if I said anything, but I saw it." Claire handed the baby to another man. "Elliot isn't John Carrington's son, and if they find out, the inheritance is void. Claire bought my silence with money." The tape hissed, cutting to static. Then her mother's voice returned. The man had her eyes, blue like ice, not John's brown ones. "She made me swear never to tell, but..." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving only the soft whir of the tape continuing to spin. June sat frozen, the implications crashing over her like waves. If what her mother said was true, Elliot Carrington wasn't a Carrington by blood. The fortune he'd inherited, the empire he'd expanded, none of it was rightfully his. No wonder Claire had paid for silence. No wonder the photo had struck him speechless. Across town, in the presidential suite of the Brookhaven Hotel, Elliot Carrington paced the plush carpet, phone pressed to his ear. "I need everything you can find on June Marlowe," he said, voice low and urgent. "Current address, financial situation, medical records, especially any related to her daughter." The private investigator on the other end of the line, a former FBI agent named Raymond Morris who specialized in discreet inquiries, noted the tension in his client's voice. "May I ask what this is regarding, Mr. Carrington?" "No, you may not." Elliot stopped at the window, staring out at the lights of Grover's Mill spread beneath him. So small, this town, so insignificant, yet somehow it had become the epicenter of an earthquake that threatened everything he'd built. "Just find what I need. And Raymond, I need it yesterday." 3 hours later, a file appeared in Elliot's encrypted email. He poured himself 3 fingers of scotch. The bottle had cost more than June probably made in a month, and began to read. June Marlowe, 37. Single mother to Ella Marlowe, 11. No father listed on the birth certificate. Chronically behind on rent for a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. Medical debt of $17,235, primarily from her daughter's repeated hospitalizations for severe asthma. The girl had been denied continued treatment at Riverside Medical Center due to outstanding bills. Buried deeper in the file was something that made Elliot's blood run cold. A small note showing that his mother, Claire, had made a payment to June's mother shortly before her death. $20,000 for services rendered, though no specific services were listed. Claire had never mentioned knowing Mary Ellen Marlowe, yet this payment suggested otherwise. The final page contained a photograph that Raymond had somehow unearthed. Claire visiting a rural medical clinic. The timestamp in the corner matched the month and year of Ella's birth. Elliot closed the file, his mind racing. Could it be possible? Could June's daughter somehow be connected to his family? Was that why Claire had paid Mary Ellen? Was that why June had approached him now after all these years? The next morning, June arrived at work to find a legal envelope taped to the diner's door. Inside was an official notice from Riverside Medical Center. They were suing her for the full amount of her unpaid medical bills, plus interest. The court date was set for the following month. Her hands shook as she unlocked the diner, her mind calculating frantically. Even if she worked double shifts every day until then, she wouldn't have enough. And if the hospital won their case, which they certainly would, they could garnish her wages, take what little she had left. As she tied her apron around her waist, a terrible thought formed in her mind. The documents in the safety deposit box, the cassette tape, they had value. They could be sold to the highest bidder. A tabloid would pay handsomely for proof that America's real estate golden boy wasn't who he claimed to be. Or she could approach Elliot directly, offer her silence in exchange for payment. But using her mother's secrets as currency felt wrong, a betrayal of the woman who had raised her with firm principles despite their difficult circumstances. Yet, what choice did she have? Ella's health was deteriorating, and without proper medical care. The bell above the door jingled, interrupting her thoughts. June looked up, expecting the early morning regulars, Frank with his newspaper, or perhaps Mrs. Whitaker ordering her usual dry toast and black coffee. Instead, Elliot Carrington stood in the doorway alone this time, without his security detail. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a simple button-down shirt that probably cost more than all the clothes in June's closet combined. Without the armor of his wealth on display, he looked almost human, almost vulnerable. "We need to talk," he said simply, sliding into a booth by the window, away from the counter where other customers would soon arrive. June hesitated, then grabbed the coffee pot and 2 mugs. Whatever was coming, she suspected they'd both need the caffeine. As she approached his table, she noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he unfolded a napkin. Elliot Carrington, billionaire CEO, looked afraid, and somehow that was more terrifying than his arrogance had been. "You found the box," he said. It wasn't a question. June nodded, setting the mugs down and pouring coffee for them both. "I found it. And the tape." Elliot's eyes darted to hers, suddenly sharp. What tape? The realization hit her like a physical blow. He didn't know. He'd given her the key to the box without knowing exactly what was inside, which meant he was as much in the dark as she had been. "Your mother," June said carefully, watching his reaction, "had a conversation with mine. She recorded it." The color drained from Elliot's face. What did it say? Outside, the first light of dawn spread across the empty street, painting the world in shades of gold and promise. But inside, between them, shadows of the past deepened, threatening to swallow them both. The morning light filtered through the diner's blinds, casting striped shadows across Elliot's face. His coffee remained untouched, steam rising and dissipating like the certainties he'd built his life upon. June hadn't answered his question about the tape yet. Instead, she watched him, noting how different he looked without the shield of arrogance, his shoulders slightly hunched, fingers tapping nervously on the Formica tabletop. "Before I tell you what's on the tape," June said, her voice low enough that the cook who'd just arrived couldn't hear, "I need to know why you gave me the key." Elliot's gaze shifted to the window, to the small town slowly coming to life outside. A postal worker unlocked the blue mailbox across the street. A woman walked her golden retriever, pausing to let the animal sniff at a fire hydrant. "My mother kept secrets," he finally said, turning back to June. "When she died, she left letters, one to be opened immediately, others to be opened on specific dates. The one I opened last month mentioned a safety deposit box that contained the truth about the summer of 1992, but she didn't leave the key." His lips twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. "Typical Claire, always making me work for answers. I spent weeks tracking down which bank, which box number. Then I saw you with that photo, and I knew that I was connected to whatever secret she kept," June finished for him. Elliot nodded, his blue eyes, so startlingly similar to Ella's, finally meeting hers directly. "But what if she was trying to protect me? What if some truths are better left buried?" June's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. The warmth seeped into her palms, grounding her. "And what if," she countered, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was trying to hide you from yourself." Something shifted in Elliot's expression, a crack in the facade, a glimpse of the lost boy behind the billionaire's mask. Without breaking eye contact, June reached into her purse and withdrew the child's bracelet from the safety deposit box. She placed it on the table between them, the name Elliot catching the morning light. His hand moved toward it, hesitant as though it might burn him. "I remember this," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd lost it at summer camp." "You never went to summer camp that year," June said softly. "According to my mother's notes, you were at a private clinic upstate with Claire." Elliot's fingers closed around the bracelet, knuckles whitening. "Why would she lie about that?" "The same reason she'd pay for my mother's silence," June said. "The same reason she'd record their conversation and lock it away. Because the truth threatened everything. Your inheritance, your identity, the Carrington name itself." Before Elliot could respond, the bell above the door jingled. Frank entered, newspaper tucked under his arm, followed by Mrs. Whitaker with her purple knit hat. June stood, professional mask sliding back into place. "I need to work. We can continue this later." Elliot nodded, slipping the bracelet into his pocket. "I'm staying at the Brookhaven, room 701. He left a $50 bill under his untouched coffee cup and walked out, the weight of unanswered questions visible in the slope of his shoulders. The morning rush kept June busy, her body on autopilot, while her mind churned with possibilities. By noon, she was exhausted, the lack of sleep from the previous night catching up with her. Her manager noticed her pallor. "You look like death warmed over, June. Go home. I'll cover the rest of your shift." Grateful, June untied her apron and headed home. She found Mrs. Peterson waiting outside her apartment, anxiety etched into her weathered face. "Ella collapsed at my place," she said without preamble. "I called an ambulance. They've taken her to Riverside Memorial." The world tilted beneath June's feet. Riverside, the same hospital that was suing her, that had refused to treat Ella without payment up front. She fumbled for her keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock her door and grab her purse. "I'll drive you," Mrs. Peterson offered, but June was already running toward the bus stop, heart hammering against her ribs like a frantic bird. The hospital waiting room was a sterile purgatory of beige walls and uncomfortable chairs. June approached the intake desk, breathless and disheveled. "My daughter, Ella Marlowe." They brought her in by ambulance. The receptionist's fingers clacked on her keyboard. Her expression shifted subtly as she read something on her screen. "Ah, yes, Ella Marlowe." A pointed glance at the computer. "I see there's a financial hold on your account." June's hands curled into fists at her sides. "She's 11 years old and can't breathe. You can't deny her treatment." "Of course not," the receptionist said, her tone professionally neutral. "She's receiving emergency care, but for continued treatment." She let the sentence hang, its meaning clear. June wanted to scream, to reach across the counter and shake this woman who could reduce her daughter's life to a column in a spreadsheet. Instead, she took a deep breath. Where is she now? "Treatment room 4. But June was already moving, pushing through the double doors into the emergency department, ignoring the receptionist's calls to stop. She found Ella in a curtained bay, oxygen mask covering her small face, an IV in her arm. Her eyes were closed, dark lashes stark against too pale skin. "Ma'am, you can't be in here without authorization," a nurse said, stepping forward. "I'm her mother," June said, voice breaking as she reached for Ella's hand. A doctor appeared, young with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Marlowe, I'm Dr. Bennett. Your daughter is stabilizing, but her condition is concerning. The asthma has progressed significantly. She needs specialized treatment." "Whatever she needs," June said immediately. "Please, just help her." Dr. Bennett glanced at the nurse, then back to June. "Given the situation with your account, I've called in a pediatric pulmonary specialist who's agreed to consult pro bono. He should be here soon." June's gratitude was a physical ache in her chest. "Thank you. Thank you so much." 20 minutes later, the specialist arrived, tall with salt and pepper hair and confident movements. He introduced himself as Dr. Alexander Mitchell, examining Ella with gentle efficiency while explaining each step to June. "She's responding well to the bronchodilators," he said, "but I'd like to add a corticosteroid to reduce the inflammation." He scribbled something on a prescription pad. "This should help prevent future attacks, but it's expensive." "I'll figure something out," June said, determination hardening her voice. As Dr. Mitchell finished his examination, his gaze caught on something, Ella's hospital bracelet. He stared at it for a moment, brow furrowed. Then, to June's confusion, he gently lifted Ella's wrist, studying the medical ID bracelet more closely. "This bracelet," he said, his voice suddenly softer. "It looks exactly like one my brother used to wear when we were children." June's heart stuttered. "Your brother?" Dr. Mitchell nodded absently, still looking at Ella's wrist. "Yes, my adoptive brother. We lost touch years ago, but..." His gaze lifted to June's face, then to Ella's. Recognition dawned slowly in his eyes. "Those eyes," he whispered, "they're just like Elliot's." The world around June seemed to slow, then stop completely. Dr. Mitchell, Elliot's brother. It couldn't be coincidence, and he'd recognized something in Ella, something familiar. "This was my brother's," Dr. Mitchell said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small object. In his palm lay a medical alert bracelet, nearly identical to the one June had shown Elliot earlier that morning. "I've carried it for years, hoping to return it someday." June stared at the bracelet, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving, falling into place with dizzying speed. The connection between Elliot and Ella, the payment from Claire, the secret her mother had taken to her grave. "Your brother," she said carefully. "Would his name happen to be Elliot Carrington?" The cemetery sat on a gentle hill overlooking Grover's Mill, marble headstones catching the afternoon sunlight like scattered pearls. June stood before her mother's grave, a simple granite marker that had cost 3 months' worth of tips to afford. Wind rustled through the oak trees, sending shadows dancing across the engraved words. Mary Ellen Marlowe. She knew too much. Those words, chosen by her mother before her death, had always seemed like a dark joke, a final defiance against a world that had given her little and taken much. Now they read like a warning, an epitaph that held more truth than June had ever realized. She crouched down, brushing away fallen leaves from the base of the stone. 3 days had passed since Ella's hospitalization. The girl was home now, breathing easier thanks to new medication that Dr. Mitchell had somehow arranged despite June's financial situation. The doctor had been careful after their unexpected revelation, neither confirming nor denying his connection to Elliot, but his eyes, the same shape as Ella's, though brown instead of blue, had told June everything. "I should have asked more questions," she whispered to the headstone. "Should have made you tell me everything before." Before cancer had stolen her mother's voice, before secrets had been sealed behind lips that could no longer speak, a twig snapped behind her. June turned, expecting to see another mourner or perhaps the groundskeeper. Instead, a man in his 60s stood several yards away, his posture hesitant as though unsure of his welcome. His suit was well worn but carefully pressed, and he clutched a bouquet of white lilies, her mother's favorite. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "Are you Mary Ellen's daughter?" June rose slowly, wariness coiling in her chest. "Who's asking?" The man stepped closer, extending a weathered hand. "Malcolm Reeves. I worked for the Carrington family for 30 years. Your mother and I were friends." June didn't take his hand. "Did Elliot send you?" Malcolm shook his head, lowering his arm. "No, Miss Marlowe. I've been visiting your mother's grave every month since she passed. Today's the first time I've seen anyone else here." He placed the lilies carefully at the base of the headstone. "She was a good woman, loyal to a fault." "Loyal to the Carringtons, you mean?" June said, bitterness seeping into her voice. "Loyal to Claire," Malcolm corrected gently. "And to you. Everything she did, the silence, the secrets, was to protect you." June's laugh was hollow, echoing among the gravestones. "Protect me? From what? The truth?" Malcolm studied her face for a long moment, as though making a decision. Finally, he reached into his jacket and withdrew a yellowed envelope. "I promised your mother I'd give you this if you ever started asking questions. It's Elliot's original birth certificate." With trembling fingers, June opened the envelope. The document inside was official, stamped with a state seal, but something was odd. In the field marked Father, someone had written Unknown, but the word had been crossed out, with John Carrington written above it in blue ink. The same blue ink from the letter in the safe deposit box. "Claire changed it herself," Malcolm explained, watching June's expression. She was desperate to secure John's acceptance of the child. He knew, of course, the timing made it impossible for the boy to be his, but appearances were everything to the Carringtons. John agreed to the deception in exchange for Claire's absolute loyalty and discretion. June stared at the document, its implications swirling like autumn leaves in a gust of wind. Elliot isn't a Carrington by blood. He has no legitimate claim to the inheritance. Malcolm nodded solemnly. John made Claire sign papers, legal documents ensuring that if the truth ever came out, everything would revert to his blood relatives. She lived in fear for decades, paying for silence, hiding evidence, including my mother's silence, June said, the pieces finally connecting. Mary Ellen was the only one who knew the whole truth, who the real father was, what Claire had done to protect her son's future. She could have destroyed everything with a single word. June carefully refolded the birth certificate, her mind racing. With this document alone, she could upend Elliot's world, expose the lie at the heart of his fortune, his identity, his very existence. She could solve her financial problems in an instant by selling this information to the right people. But something nagged at her, a detail that didn't quite fit. If my mother knew everything, why didn't she use it? Why live in poverty when she could have demanded more money? Malcolm's expression softened. Because she loved Claire in her way, and because she knew that revealing the truth would hurt more than just the Carringtons. His eyes flicked meaningfully toward the path leading back to the cemetery gates. Before June could press him further, her phone vibrated in her pocket. The display showed an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, she answered. "June Marlowe?" a woman's voice asked. "Speaking. This is Lena from the Grover's Mill post office. A package was just delivered for you, marked urgent. It's too large for your mailbox." June frowned. She wasn't expecting anything. "I'll be there soon," she said, ending the call and turning back to Malcolm. "I have to go, but I have more questions." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll be here next Sunday at the same time. Mary Ellen deserves her flowers." He turned to go, then paused. "Miss Marlowe, be careful with what you've learned. Truth is a weapon that wounds the wielder as often as the target." The post office was nearly empty when June arrived, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the dusty windows. Lena, a plump woman with kind eyes and purple-tinted hair, waved her over to the counter. "Here you go, honey," she said, heaving a package wrapped in brown paper onto the counter. No return address, but it came priority overnight. The package was heavier than it looked. June signed for it and carried it to her car, apprehension building with each step. Inside the vehicle, she tore away the wrapping to reveal a plain cardboard box. When she opened it, she found an old cassette player, nicer than the one she'd bought from Mrs. Abernathy, and a single tape labeled with today's date. Heart pounding, she inserted the tape and pressed play. "If anyone is listening to this recording," Claire Carrington's refined voice emerged from the speaker, "then the truth I've buried for so long is finally surfacing. The true heir has known the truth since childhood, but chose to ignore it. And the woman he humiliated can now save him, or destroy him completely." June hit stop, her breathing shallow. Claire had made this tape recently, before her death. She'd known this day would come, the day when June and Elliot would cross paths, when secrets would begin to unravel. As she drove home, June's mind replayed Malcolm's words. Truth is a weapon that wounds the wielder as often as the target. What did Claire mean by the true heir? And how did it connect to Ella, to Dr. Mitchell, to the tangled web of lies that had ensnared them all? One thing was becoming increasingly clear. Elliot Carrington's arrogance at the diner hadn't been random. He'd been running from something, hiding behind wealth and mockery. And now, as the board of his company moved to have him removed, using rumors of his questionable parentage as ammunition, he was running out of places to hide. When she arrived home, she found Elliot waiting outside her apartment door, his expensive car conspicuous in the dingy parking lot. He looked up as she approached, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "I found you through the hospital records," he explained before she could ask. "I needed to see you." June unlocked her door, gesturing for him to follow her inside. The apartment felt smaller with him in it, his presence filling the cramped space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. "I'm not here to threaten or bribe you," he said, watching as she set down the package containing Claire's tape. "I'm here because the board is moving against me. They've heard rumors, whispers about my parentage. By this time next week, I could lose everything." His gaze met hers, direct and unflinching. "You decide what the world learns, June. And if Ella truly is my niece, or something more, you decide what legacy she inherits." The storm hit Grover's Mill without warning, sheets of rain pounding against windows and transforming streets into shallow rivers. Lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating June's determined face as she navigated her borrowed car through the deluge. The windshield wipers struggled against the downpour, creating momentary arcs of visibility that disappeared almost instantly. 3 days had passed since Elliot's visit to her apartment. 3 days of sleepless nights, of turning possibilities over in her mind like smooth stones in a river. 3 days of watching Ella breathe easier thanks to the medication Dr. Mitchell, Elliot's brother, though neither had confirmed it, had provided. Now June clutched a manila folder to her chest as she parked outside the Grover's Mill Gazette, the town's small but respected newspaper. Inside the folder, the birth certificate Malcolm had given her, Claire's tape, and the transcript June had painstakingly typed out, her fingers cramping as she'd captured every damning word. Evidence that could destroy the Carrington empire with a single front-page story. Rain hammered against her umbrella as she dashed from the car to the newspaper's entrance, her heart pounding in rhythm with the storm. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the reception area's worn furniture and outdated magazines. A young woman with thick glasses looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Howard Jenkins," June said, water dripping from her coat onto the linoleum floor. "It's important." The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll want to hear what I have to say." June tightened her grip on the folder. "Tell him it's about Elliot Carrington." That name worked like a magic spell. Within minutes, June was seated in a cluttered office, facing a balding man with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers. Howard Jenkins, editor-in-chief of the Gazette for 27 years, studied her with undisguised curiosity. "So," he said, folding his hands on the desk, "what do you have on Carrington that's worth interrupting my deadline day?" June opened her mouth to answer, but her phone vibrated in her pocket. Apologizing, she checked the screen. A text from Mrs. Peterson, who was watching Ella. "Your daughter just called," the message read. "She says the doctor gave her new medicine. She can breathe better now, and apparently someone paid for everything." June stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. Elliot, it had to be. Despite everything hanging in the balance, he'd ensured that Ella received care. Why? Strategic manipulation, or something more complex? "Ms. Marlowe," Jenkins prompted, "you were about to tell me something groundbreaking about Elliot Carrington." The folder felt suddenly heavy in her hands. She looked at it, then at the editor's expectant face. On his wall hung framed front pages, local stories that had made national news, scandals that had toppled small-town officials. Her revelation would dwarf them all. "I need a minute," she said, rising abruptly. In the hallway, June sank onto a wooden bench, her thoughts churning like the storm clouds outside. She opened the folder, looking again at the birth certificate with its tellingly altered paternity, at the transcript of Claire's confession, at the photograph that had started everything, the little boy with the missing tooth, his arm around June's mother, his future still unwritten. She remembered Elliot's laughter in the diner that first night, cruel, mocking, the armor of a man terrified of being exposed. But she also remembered his face when he'd seen the photograph, the lost look in his eyes, the way his hand had trembled as he'd touched the image of his younger self. And then there was Ella, breathing easily for the first time in months. Ella, whose medication was suddenly paid for. Ella, who might share blood with the man June had come here to destroy. Claire's voice echoed in her memory. The woman he humiliated can now save him, or destroy him completely. Not just the power to ruin Elliot, but the power to save him. Was that what Claire had intended all along? June's mother's headstone flashed in her mind. She knew too much. But perhaps the greater burden was knowing just enough to hurt, but not enough to heal. Rising from the bench, June walked back to Jenkins' office with newfound clarity. The editor looked up, pen poised over a notepad. "Ready now?" he asked. June nodded slowly. "I've changed my mind. I'm not giving you this story." Jenkins' disappointment was palpable. "That's your right, of course. May I ask why?" June considered the question, rain drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. "Because some truths need to be spoken person to person, not shouted from headlines." She left the newspaper office without looking back, but instead of returning to her car, she walked to the end of the hall, where a small mailroom operated. Taking an envelope from the counter, she slipped a single item inside. Not the birth certificate or the tape, but the photograph that had started everything. On the back, she wrote in careful letters, "Sometimes forgiveness is the strongest way to speak truth. Addressing it to Elliot at his corporate headquarters, she handed it to the clerk with enough cash for priority delivery. As she stepped back into the storm, June felt lighter, as though she'd set down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. The rain had lessened to a gentle patter, and breaks in the clouds allowed shafts of late afternoon sunlight to pierce through, transforming puddles into mirrors that caught the sky's reflection. Her phone rang. Ella this time, not Mrs. Peterson. "Mom," her daughter's voice came through clearly, without the wheezing that had become so familiar. "When are you coming home? Dr. Mitchell is here again. He brought pictures to show me." "Pictures of what, sweetheart?" "Of my uncle when he was my age. He says we have the same eyes." June's breath caught. "I'll be right there," she promised, quickening her pace toward the car. Behind her, through the newspaper's window, she could see Jenkins opening the envelope she'd left, not with the evidence but with a simple note. This was the last time he laughed like a child. By the time June arrived home, the storm had passed completely. Her apartment, usually dim even at midday, was filled with golden light that spilled across the worn carpet and illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. Dr. Mitchell sat at the kitchen table with Ella, a photo album open between them. He looked up as June entered, a question in his eyes. She nodded once, a silent confirmation of their shared understanding. Without words, they had established a fragile trust. Not friendship, not yet, but a mutual recognition of the complex threads that bound their lives together. "Ella's breathing tests are excellent," he said, professional mask sliding back into place. "I've prescribed a maintenance inhaler that should prevent future attacks. All expenses have been covered by an anonymous donor through the hospital's charity program." June didn't challenge the transparent fiction. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you." After he left, June sat beside her daughter, examining the photographs he'd shared, a young Alexander Mitchell and his adoptive brother Elliot at a lakeside summer camp. In every image, Elliot's smile seemed forced, his eyes holding a wariness beyond his years, except in one photo, where he was laughing genuinely as he helped a smaller child bait a fishing hook. On the back, someone had written, "Elliot teaching Tommy, July 1992. The same month as the tape. The same summer, everything had changed. That night, as Ella slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, June sat by the window watching stars emerge from the storm-washed sky. She had made her choice, not to expose or exploit, but to let the truth find its own path. Whether that was wisdom or cowardice, only time would tell. 6 months transformed Marlene's diner almost beyond recognition. Fresh paint in warm cream tones replaced the peeling beige. New booths with burgundy upholstery offered comfortable seating instead of cracked vinyl that caught on customers' clothing. The flickering fluorescent tubes had given way to pendant lighting that cast a gentle glow over polished countertops. Even the menu had expanded, featuring locally sourced ingredients and weekend specials that attracted diners from neighboring towns. Behind the counter, June moved with newfound confidence. Her name tag now read "Manager," and the chronic pain in her lower back had eased thanks to proper medical treatment, covered by the comprehensive insurance that came with her new position. The promotion had come unexpectedly 2 months ago, when the previous owner announced his retirement and sold the diner to an anonymous investor who immediately implemented renovations and appointed June to oversee operations. She knew who the investor was, of course, though his name appeared nowhere in the paperwork. Just as she knew who had arranged for Ella's scholarship to Westridge Academy, the prestigious private school where her daughter now thrived, her asthma properly managed, her natural intelligence nurtured by dedicated teachers. "More coffee, Mr. Hanson?" June asked, approaching a booth where an elderly man was completing a crossword puzzle. "Please, June, and I've told you 100 times to call me Frank." He smiled up at her, the same truck driver who had been a regular since before the renovation. "The cranberry muffins today are exceptional. New recipe," she explained, refilling his cup. "We're trying to incorporate more local produce." The bell above the door chimed, and June glanced up, her practiced smile softening into something more genuine. Elliot Carrington entered, dressed not in the expensive suit of their first encounter, but in simple khakis and a blue button-down shirt. No security detail accompanied him. No flashy watch adorned his wrist. His hair, longer now than the carefully groomed style of 6 months ago, curled slightly at his collar. Without a word, He took his usual seat at the counter, the same spot he had occupied once a week for the past 4 months. June poured his coffee without being asked, placing it before him along with a slice of apple pie still warm from the oven. "Thank you," he said quietly. Those were often the only words exchanged between them during these visits. He never mentioned the photograph she had sent back to him, never spoke of the birth certificate she had not used against him, never acknowledged the board meeting where, according to the business pages, he had narrowly retained control of his company after presenting compelling personal documentation that silenced the questions about his parentage. Instead, he came, ate his pie, drank his coffee, and before leaving always cleared his own dishes and wiped down the counter where he had sat. A small gesture of humility from a man who had once laughed at the very idea of serving himself. Today, however, was different. As June turned to assist another customer, Elliot spoke. "The renovations turned out well." She paused, looking back at him. "They did. The customers appreciate it. And the new manager seems to be working out." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "She's learning," June replied, matching his tone. "Day by day." Their eyes held for a moment, blue meeting brown, secrets shared but unspoken, before June continued to the next table. When she returned, Elliot had finished his pie and was sliding an envelope across the counter. "What's this?" she asked, not touching it. "Ella's midterm report card," he said. "Dr. Mitchell thought you might want to see it before it arrives by mail. She's top of her class in science." June's heart swelled with pride as she glanced at the straight A's on the paper inside. "She wants to be a doctor, like her uncle," she said, the relationship acknowledged for the first time between them. Elliot nodded, something flickering in his eyes that might have been satisfaction, or perhaps something deeper. Alexander is an excellent role model. They had never discussed the exact nature of Ella's connection to the Carrington family. The DNA tests that would confirm suspicions remained untaken, unnecessary. The resemblance between Ella and Claire Carrington in the old photographs told enough of the story. The same determined chin, the same way of tilting the head when considering a problem. Whether Claire had been protecting her granddaughter as well as her son, whether June's mother had been entrusted with more secrets than anyone had realized, these questions lingered in the margins of their cautious interactions, unasked and unanswered. As closing time approached, the diner emptied gradually until only Elliot remained, lingering over a second cup of coffee that had long gone cold. June wiped down tables, straightened chairs, and finally hung her apron on the hook beside the kitchen door. "I'm heading out," she said, gathering her purse. "Ella has a science project presentation tonight at school." Elliot stood, clearing his dishes as always. "The cellular mitosis model." June raised an eyebrow, surprised. "She told you about that?" "She emails me sometimes," he admitted. "Questions about business math, mostly. She's quite bright." The understatement hung in the air between them. Ella wasn't just bright, she was exceptional, with an intellectual curiosity that reminded June painfully of her mother. That she now had opportunities Mary Ellen Marlowe could never have imagined for her granddaughter seemed like a form of justice, more profound than any scandal or lawsuit could have achieved. "You should come sometime," June said, the invitation surprising them both. "To one of her presentations. I think she'd like that." Elliot's expression remained carefully neutral, but something shifted in his posture. A tension releasing, perhaps. "I wouldn't want to intrude." "It wouldn't be an intrusion." June locked the register, then turned to face him fully. "She knows, Elliot. Not everything, but enough. That we have history. That you're helping with her education. That some families are complicated." He absorbed this information silently, his gaze drifting to the exact spot on the floor where he had stood 6 months ago, laughing cruelly at a waitress he'd perceived as beneath him. "I was insufferable that night," he said finally, the closest he had come to an apology. "You were," June agreed. No accusation in her tone, just simple truth. They walked to the door together, June turning off lights as they went. Outside, twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Their cars, his still expensive but no longer ostentatious, hers a reliable sedan purchased with her improved salary, sat at opposite ends of the parking lot. "June," Elliot said as they prepared to part ways. "Thank you." She knew he wasn't thanking her for the pie, or the coffee, or even the invitation to Ella's presentation. He was thanking her for the choice she had made 6 months ago, to protect rather than destroy, to forgive rather than expose. "Some truths," she said softly, echoing the words she had written on the back of the photograph. Don't need to be shouted to change the world. A single tear escaped, trailing down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Elliot noticed but said nothing, respecting her emotion without trying to diminish it. As he walked to his car, June gazed back at the diner, at the exact booth where everything had begun, with a photograph and a silence that had spoken volumes. Another tear fell, this one carrying not pain, but a complex mixture of grief and gratitude, loss and unexpected gain. The imaginary camera pulled back, revealing the small town nestled in the valley, lights beginning to twinkle as darkness gathered. A narrator's voice, gentle and knowing. Some truths don't need to be shouted to change the world. Sometimes it's enough to show them and let silence speak for itself. As our story of June and Elliot comes to a close, we're left to ponder the power of a single moment. How one photograph, one decision, one act of unexpected mercy can alter the course of multiple lives. When faced with the choice between revenge and forgiveness, June chose the harder path, not exposing a truth that would destroy, but using it to heal instead. What would you have done in June's position? Would you have exposed Elliot's secret to the world, claiming the justice you deserved? Or would you have found the strength to see beyond your pain to the possibility of redemption? Sometimes, the most powerful response to cruelty isn't more cruelty. It's the silent dignity of choosing compassion when revenge is within reach. Perhaps the most profound truth in this story is that our lives are connected in ways we can't always see or understand. The billionaire and the waitress, seemingly worlds apart, were bound by threads of family, secrets, and shared humanity that neither could escape. In the end, it wasn't wealth or status that mattered, but the courage to face the truth and the wisdom to know when some truths are better spoken in silence. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that reveal the depth of human connection. Let us know in the comments what you would have done if you were June, and share this video with someone who appreciates stories about second chances and the quiet power of forgiveness.